So yeah, they've got this guy building on what he's done before, trying new things. I don't think he'll be trying to figure out a formula or a grand design that evolves. It'll all be instinct. His gut will be telling him, I'm going to try this. And then there is that lovely, holy moment where it all joins together into one thing. And for Jeff, that was Grid Runner.
It was sort of like Centipede. It was based off Centipede. But I'd got to the point where I enjoyed putting my own spin on things. I was no longer content just to try and copy an arcade game. I wanted to do something else.
I like the idea that shooting things creates obstructions which then alter the path of things to come. And that does happen in Grid Runner to an extent. I'd put lasers and stuff in and made it much more of a space theme, a garden theme. And in Grid Runner, every time the laser pulses, all the obstacles on the field advance one level of evolution, and they've got a maximum of 6 they can go through, and then they turn into a bomb, right, and fall down.
It was, and I think it was one of the first Commodore shows, and this American guy in a suit came and was looking at what everybody was doing there, and came over to us and said to me, "We like Andy's attack, and could you put that on a cartridge for us to sell in the US?" True to his word, he went back and I figured out how to put the game on a cartridge, and they started selling it. And it sold okay, but it got our foot in the door over there, and they wanted more games. So I made Grid Runner, and I sent out a copy to the guy in the US. And here's what I've just done. I was woken up from sleep by the phone ringing, and I got up, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, something like that. I'm going to go out and see what's what. The phone rings, and the guy goes, "That game's amazing, we've been playing it for like 8 hours, I can't believe how good it is." So you're probably going to make some decent money off this. I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I went back to bed and back to sleep, woke up in the morning and thought, was that just a dream I had last night about somebody ringing me up and saying I'm going to make some money? And thankfully I'd written down on the pad by the phone what had been said. So. And sure enough, they did a great job of selling that game. I think it got to number 1 on at least one of the US software charts at some point, and made us a fair bit of money. I think that was the point where my parents realised that something was really up. Maybe this is going to work out quite well. We've done so many of them, really. We did Grid Runner on the 8-bits, that was more or less just plain Grid Runner that we had on the VIC-20, except with different resolutions. Then I did Super Grid Runner on the ST and Amiga, that was controlled with a mouse, and you had like a detachable nose cone which you could place in one part of the screen, and then you could move to another side and they'd both be firing, and you could use the right mouse button to retrieve it at any time, a bit like the nose cone in the Pocket PC. Yeah, the thing there was you had to rescue sheep that were coming down the screen, and if you got killed, then the pieces of your wreckage would start to fall down, but if you managed to guide them onto the back of a sheep, then you get a sheepy save and come back to life. And that actually came from a bug. That came from a bug where if you died, then it would act as if you'd picked up the sheep when you hit it. And I thought, it started happening quite a bit. I thought, that's actually quite a nice mechanic, so that when you die, you can retrieve yourself. Grid Runner Evolution. There's a lot more stuff going on in there. It's a much more advanced game in some ways. I ripped off sounds from just about all my favourite 1980s arcade games because I wanted it to sound like a 1980s arcade room. You know that feeling when you walk in and there's just all these sounds going off all around you? That's what I want to sound like playing Grid Runner, because it's supposed to be an evocation of an arcade game that never existed. It's done in the style of a Namco coin-op, so it needs that same kind of atmosphere around it. I think the Grid Runner on the iPhone, it's simpler than some of the other versions, but it's very pure, it's very arcade-like, and it's lovely. I think the most recent version, by taking Grid Runner back to its roots and then just building a few simple enhancements, I think I've come up with a better game. Because your power-up stack, when you start out, you just got to pew, pew, pew out the front, and that gets a bit faster as you shoot things, so you pew, pew, pew a bit faster. And you get various little tiles that power you up, and they may give you 4-way pew, 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 or something like that for a little bit. But you get the stacking effect. So you can have 3 or 4 of these things come together, and then suddenly you're just this intense fire flower of like shots just bursting out and flooding the whole thing. You just feel like a god for a few seconds. And it's nice, so that makes you like, yeah, sort of a little touch of euphoria there to help you along your way. I like living in the countryside. I ended up buying this little house in Wales, in this beautiful little valley. I wanted to have a bit of space for beasties, really. Nice spotty ears. I like to keep pet sheep. When you're getting stressed out in front of the machine and you're indoors all day, and it's so nice just to be able to like go out and take a stroll in the field. You can't really be stressed out around sheep. Morning, Jerry.
Like Minter will like go off to, feed the sheep in the morning and do a nice 10-minute long Twitter video of him just feeding crackers to his sheep.
I'm sure you've seen Jeff's legendary sheep time videos that he does. Just let's go out and mooch with the sheep in the morning. Well, we can stream it from anywhere on the farm because we've got a Wi-Fi network all across the fields. And it's the perfect Geek 7, isn't it? It's like, I'm surrounded by green fields, but I've got Wi-Fi. What more do you need?
Jeff's living this gentle, suburban, modest sort of lifestyle where like his greatest indulgence is like sheep or like llamas, having this handful of animal companions.
I got the llamas in 2001. I got a pair of llamas then, but one of them died last year. We found out at the time he was probably one of the oldest llamas in Britain. He was like 25 years old, which is an extremely good age for a llama. The whole llama thing came about basically because my parents had one of these Time Life books about South America and it had a nice illustration of a llama in it. I like the look of the llama. It's like an interesting beastie. I used to reference it in some of my early work. When I was thinking of a name for the software company, I'd written a little program on the VIC-20 which effectively let me draw on a little square of characters. I could draw like a little high-res design. I drew this little llama in there. And I wrote underneath it Llamasoft with 3 exclamation marks after it. I thought, yeah, that's what I'm going to call my software company. It's going to be called Llamasoft.
Jeff is extremely unique in what he's done from day one. Jeff, from the very beginning, I think, knew what great gameplay was. And he throws a bunch of beasties in there and put his own trademark on.
That much until I Attack of the Mutant Camels. Again, it's based on somebody else's game. I'd been to Winchester. There was a little video game shop in there. I can't remember what my parents were doing down there, but while I was just hanging out in town while they were there, I went in the shop, thought I could play some of they had VCS games in there, and they had the Parker Brothers Empire Strikes Back game. And it's fairly crude, but they've got these big blocky walkers that walk along. And I played it. Didn't at that point think camels. The camels thing came when I saw a review of that game in computer video games, and they described these walkers as being like giant mechanical camels. And I thought, actually, you could do a game like that, but why not have them be giant mutant camels? It was a bit rough. The scrolling was very chunk res. I hadn't really worked out at that point how to do the fine scrolling on the Commodore 64. That sort of set the direction. Things kind of... We were going to be the people who did these games with these weird animals in.
Well, my favorite Jeff Minter game is Revenge of the Mutant Camels. So I remember the first time I loaded it up and I was like, what the hell is this? Am I controlling a camel? And the camel is shooting. I was expecting a ship or whatever, because back in those days, a camel was not the protagonist of a game until Jeff came along. And I think that's really, really cool and makes him unique, and his game's unique as well. And it taught me that there is no limits when it comes to making games. You can do whatever you want. And Jeff showed me that.
To me, playing a game is not just about getting to the end and beating the final boss. The actual playing of the game should be the reward in and of itself. I mean, the journey should be the valuable part, not the conclusion. You don't just want to get to the end of the game and say, oh, I've done that, I'll cross it off and put it aside. I want to go, one of my games to be certain that people will come back to and think, oh, I'm going to play that. May not get my high score, may not even get to the end. I want to play it just because I really, really enjoy the experience playing. It's about listening to a music album. You listen to it again and again. You don't just listen to it once, oh, I've heard the lyrics now, I'll put that aside and I'll never listen to it again. You listen to it because it makes you feel good, because it's uplifting, or because it speaks to you in some way. Makes you smile, gives you...
Loved games and came from a place of, Atari and classic coin-ops, and when you think about game developers that learn their craft by riffing on their favorite arcade games at the time. Well, what happens if you did Astro and llamas and goats instead of those things? And that's how he made it his own.
About some of the early games, because they were very constrained by hardware limitations, you could often only have a very small set of rules, but the very best games, out of that small set of rules, you could get a lot of complex behaviours emerging, feeding something back to you. So basically what you're doing when you're creating a game is you're fine-tuning that feedback loop. You're defining what it is, you're defining what the stimulus and response is going to be, and you try and make that satisfying. It's the core of what's happening. So what I'm doing when I'm trying to make a game, I'm trying to make you feel a particular way. I'm trying to make you feel that way by tuning this loop until it feels really good. There's a point where it's the direction I go in. It's of game design, really. On a piece of paper and submit it to people as a pitch long, and it's fine-tuned. But it's all about this feedback loop. That's the core of it. Making a game is impossible to move around it and fine-tune. You can build on it and add more. It will just take iteration. If you like, and the bits which you like, you can enhance. But for me, it's just playing it. The last thing I do at night will be to play the game for an hour or so every single night. Just going over myself, what I like, what I don't. Just a lot of hard work like that, really. I was quite really the most effective of 3 in the liquor ships in Iridis Alpha. Perhaps in the if I was redoing that game now, I would put them a bit further away.
I feel like we don't talk the split screen thing that was happening, and it was very weird to if you just give it 5 minutes, give it 10 minutes, and it'll click, and you go, oh, now I get it.
I learned something about difficulty. Basically, I've always been learning about difficulty. It's very important to allow people some levels of grace. It can be nice to have a level that plateaus a bit or even goes down a bit and gives them a chance to recover and get a few lives back. So the early levels, certainly no level 3 liquor. I remember lying in my bedroom in the dark and listening to Pink Floyd. And in my head I would imagine like sort of abstract geometric shapes sort of doing stuff in time to the music. For a long time these abstract visions were just in my head. As I went through school, that kind of went to the back of my mind. And at first when I was programming games, it didn't really occur to me that I could use the computer to do that. One day I was out for a run and I just thought, why don't I try doing, using some of this tech that I've got for making games and make something that's not a game, and why not try and just do a single approximation of what this thing I'd had in mind, this machine to externalise the abstract stuff in your head, to go how you might go about making one of those. And so I came up with this like 1K program which I called Psychedelia. You just have this dot and you move the dot around, you press the button and all these flowing patterns would come out. You could put symmetry on them, so you could kind of direct this in time to the music. It was lovely, and it blew my mind just how cool this was to play with. And I got my mates there and I said, you've got to try this, and sat them down and put on the Floyd and gave them the joysticks and said, just do this, and people really enjoyed it. And it was so nice. It was so pure, it was something else. I felt like I'd broken through into some area where not many people had been working. In fact, people had been working there. It was actually only years later I found out that Atari made the Atari video music in 1977. When I did find other people doing it, I kind of felt validated, really. I felt there is something here that's worth looking at. There is something that's perhaps worth moving forward and looking at in a bit more detail. I felt it was something that was too pure and too away. And there was a hex list and you put this thing in. Eventually we thought, okay, we will do a version for sale. An extended version which we sold. It wasn't very expensive. We released it and the reviews were very much polarised. It was probably one of the most divisive things I've ever done, because you had like some people, well, obviously, they'd been waiting for something like this to come along, and there was a few reviewers who were really just like got it straight away. There's this one guy who said, the review was something like, I find mere words too cumbersome to describe the brilliance of this concept, or something like that. I'm thinking, well, that's the best review I've ever had, and probably the best review I'm ever likely to get. And then for the same programme, somebody else was saying, what absolute load of rubbish, what the hell does Minter think he's doing? So, but I knew I was onto something.
Embracing the medium in such a radically different way from anyone, and he's not even sure, I don't think he's even sure.
In front of the telly, instantly, it's like something's happening on the screen. And it wouldn't necessarily norm games, but like, I think it was a demo in colour space, and there's this interactive real TV, and went an 8-bit version. Ever since then, it's been all about.
It's really interesting because you look at his work, it starts with knockoffs of other games, but with things that he's adding to a lot of experimentation.
The arcade style stuff that people do, I think, oh, we've got these machines, you can do anything with them if you want, why not try? In character with a gun always shooting something, you had by just moving this little droid around. The controls were very weird. It's kind of it probably would have worked better with a mouse than with a digital joystick. But as it was a bit inaccessible. And Sent me a very nice letter saying how much he enjoyed. I think it was Anticipital. And part of the reason he got the job at Zap was because he'd shown people his skills on Anticipital. And he gave
half of his games, but the half I did like. For me, the opportunity on Zap was just. So of course, one of the first games we review is a Jeff game. So I'm like, yes. I just didn't get on with it at all.
It was all just experimentation. It wasn't done out of bloody mindedness. One of the things I did like in Mumble On was the grid that you could move around to play the levels in different orders. It was just like, let's see what happens. Does this work? I think it works. Maybe, people don't agree with me, but at least I tried. There's more than one magazine that didn't like it.
The failing was, because this is all sort of new ground doing all these reviews in this way, critiquing was not, at the time, was just pretty much an opinion. It wasn't it was more a case of you'd write about what it was about and you'd give an opinion.
I was being a bit precious about my design when it came down to it. It's an accessible thing. It wasn't good enough to make that game work well. Anyway, it's all water under the bridge now. I like going to the Play Expo because it's really nice. People just come up and we can hang out and play some games. Yeah, to me, it's a great privilege when I meet people who actually enjoy the stuff that much. I think it's quite something when you meet somebody and they still remember playing Bloody Attack of the Mutant Camels or Grid Runner, and they'll tell you how much they enjoyed it. I mean, the fact that they still remember it after all these years is one thing, but they actually seek you out and tell you about it is entirely another.
One of the lovely things about meeting Jeff is that you could walk up to him and be kind of like, hi, I'm going to talk to you about your games and effectively your work for half an hour. And he's just kind of like, yeah, let's talk about the Jaguar, let's talk about this, here's a project I decided to make that never got finished.
I've always enjoyed that. One of the things I enjoyed in the old days was going with Llamasoft to the old 8-bit computer shows.
The Llamasoft stand was like, it was like Mecca to all of us lot. It was just like, what's new, we've got to go and find Jeff's stand. And you'd see it from miles away. That's going to be Jeff's stand, because like there's this huge plushy sheep on top of the booth or something.
For us, it was never really about selling. It was about
letting people come up and they could chat.
Turn up to the shows, all having a wonderful time.
You know, when I was a younger, I know today, you know, it's people from all. You'd always see a few of the regulars. It would be at Elf. It was just like, you know, this is people who'd go along and their dad would strike up a conversation, something, you know, the boys do. Jeff's, you know, he's a pretty, you know, watching.
A couple of shows go past the Llamasoft stand, but Jeff wasn't there. So, and I don't think back then when I was a teenager it would have ever have occurred to me to try and hang out with Jeff Minter. And then when I was in my late 20s, I was working for magazines and I'd got to interview quite a few big names. So I became a bit more blasé about it. So I'm of the feeling you should, you know, people say you never meet your heroes. I think you should always meet your heroes if you get the chance, because sometimes they turn out to be fantastic.
No one else is Jeff Minter, or could be Jeff Minter. That's just what he was, and that came with a whole bunch of bits and pieces to do with stuff they put in his games. It looked a bit rock starish and hippie-ish as well, because it was part of what you were buying, I think. And that stuff was always communicated directly to his fans.
I like to do these newsletters. You see the newsletter called Nature of the Beast, and I'd sit down, just write a chatty little newsletter.
Too. No, not thinking it would. I think it would. Wow, for real. When you had to. He used to write them quite regularly,
and Jeff was Jeff, of being a fan of the. Used to do these great told the story. Do that is hard, and that inspired me.
what Jeff Minter has going for, inspired by the 1980s.
I mean, it's quite fair to call it philosophy from, but also we can rise of effects that we couldn't do back in the day. Back in the early days, game design and also what
most of the others, he would have the animals doing things, and it's animal, you know.
I saw half just read this one, sort of human there, and they sent to Jeff. You got a title from, and I think some animal.
It's compelling for.
As I'm in the game, very British.
In the last 20 static
Visual, not only VLM.
Mind. As an artist, his head.